Good afternoon. This is a commentary on Lecture 25 of the Foundations of Esotericism. I think there are three things of interest. There are obviously a lot more, but three things that could be commented on quite quickly. At the beginning of this lecture, Rudolf Steiner is starting to really build up his understanding of Christian esotericism and talks about these three areas of evolution that we've been talking about. The states of consciousness, or the big planetary evolutionary phases, and those of the kingdoms and those of the form. So we talk going through conditions of consciousness, conditions of kingdoms, and conditions of form. And he says that in the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, an addition has been made to that, in that the Lord's Prayer finishes off, "For yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory." And he invites us to consider that these three words, the kingdom, the power, and the glory, are important words to understand evolution. So that the power is when we're going through a condition of consciousness. Then obviously the kingdom is going through a round that we are going through many rounds at the moment. And then the form of the globes is the glory. So at the moment we are in the 25th globe of the fourth round of the fourth state of consciousness. So the kingdom, the power, and the glory being something that in Christian esotericism is given to us in a mantric form to understand these forms of evolution. So and then as we move on, we come to a more sort of central theme of the lecture, where obviously he keeps going over and over in these lectures about the states of consciousness that evolve from the deep trance to the dreamless sleep to the picture consciousness. Now in the earth we are developing the picture consciousness, the waking consciousness, whereas on Jupiter we will start to develop astral consciousness, then on Venus a further extension of etheric subconsciousness, and on Vulcan ultimately universal consciousness. But he then talks about the state of where the mineral, the plant, and the animal kingdoms come from. And he tells us that we need to understand what the third elementary kingdom is, what the second elementary kingdom is, and what the first elementary kingdom is. These are possibly confused with things like gnomes and selfs and undines, but he talks about the third elementary kingdom are the elements of light and fire that permeate space. And these are the things where we ourselves are in the astral kingdom. And he says that this kingdom, the third elementary kingdom, is really what brings about the form of things, so the physical world. The second elementary kingdom, he says, is the measure of things, whereas the first elementary kingdom are the thought seeds. The formless world is the first elementary kingdom. So the thought seeds in the first elementary kingdom, so the seeds of our thoughts as an elementary kingdom. The second elementary kingdom is one such as the measure of things. So where one figure can work upon another in such a way that it did not harm or that it was utterly destroyed. This was called the measure of things. So form, measure, and thought as the formative forces of the mineral, plant, and animal kingdom. Very important. And then he comes to the fourth elementary kingdom, which is the mineral kingdom. The plant kingdom not only reflects sense qualities, but these reflections are inwardly endowed with life. The second elementary kingdom is the formative element of the third elementary kingdom. The mineral kingdom is condensed out of the qualities belonged to the third elementary kingdom. The plant reflects the form of the second elementary kingdom and thus develops the form out of itself. The animal kingdom also reflects the intentions which lie in the first elementary kingdom. So really quite a complex understanding that we not only have the four kingdoms, but we also have behind them the intentions of the spiritual world, and then we also have the forms and the thought seeds, and ultimately the physical world. So these four kingdoms that we would normally call possibly the the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom also have these conditions behind them: form and measure and thought seeds. So that might be something to try and get our head to. But the real commentary that I would like to make today comes at the end of the lecture, which is really something that he is starting to work with in this time, 1905. Let us remember who else is around. Einstein is around, giving theories of relativity. There's all sorts of evolutionary theories. Atomism is coming about. And Steiner's real concern in his lifetime was that the nominalism, so the pure materialistic thought that had emerged once Thomas Aquinas had rescued Western philosophy from the nominalists. In other words, he tried to re-imbue Western philosophy with the knowledge that every thought is a reality. But after he died, there were philosophers who pushed Western philosophy into nominalism, which means basically that words and names are just pure names, nominalist, and that there's no reality. And thus the separation between science and spirituality, or science and religion, was kind of carved out, and materialistic science started to ever increase in its position in the world, to the point where he was very concerned that our intellect had really been taken over by pure nominalism, that there's what he calls the fall of sin in the intellect, that the intellect itself had fallen out of being able to grasp the reality of the beings, so to say, the first elementary kingdom behind things, and that in a way his work was to rescue, to redeem thinking from its materialistic world. So if you read Steiner through that lens, you can see that time and time again he is saying, be careful of the materialistic philosophies imbuing all sciences, not just natural science, but theology, psychology, medicine. Everywhere where he was looking social order, he could see how the materialistic philosophies were imbuing the way of being with each other. And so he put a lot of effort into the redemption of thinking, where he was trying to bring back the realism, which is that a thought is a reality, it belongs to the first elemental kingdom, and that it works through matter. And this is where he starts to talk about atoms. So I'll just read you what he says about an atom, because it's quite an important thing to look at. Now, I thought I had it marked, the atom. Anyway, I'll just keep looking while I'm talking. Is that he asks us to see that the atom is a formation of consciousness. And he talks about how at the end of our time, when the masters of the human round, in the seventh round, the human being will recreate ourselves. We will then be able to duplicate, to reproduce ourselves. In the seventh round, everyone will have reached the stage at which the masters stand today. Our higher self and our higher ego will then draw itself together and become atomic and form the atoms of Jupiter. Now that's the real question, how do we understand that? So for Rudolf Steiner, he talked about this as being a great Rosicrucian task, that as we, under the guidance of the masters of harmony, we are busy creating, so to say, the forms and the imaginations. We've been talking about that through this Foundations of Esotericism, what the human being does to bring artistic and moral creativity into the transformation of the physical realm at this point, but later on also the plant and the animal realm, and ultimately here in the seventh part of the earth we will transform the human kingdom as well, and that these forms then become the forces that are the dream within the atom of the next great planetary incarnation of consciousness, which Steiner calls Jupiter. And in that way he also then says that our earth, so to say, was formed, the atoms, the very atoms, and the complexity and the multiplicity and the ever complexity appearing atoms in our earth as it ever densifies and becomes ever more complex, is the result of previous masters, Rosicrucian masters, who have in a way harnessed and brought together the consciousness of that part of earth evolution and carried it over as a dreaming, as an imagination into the next great part of consciousness. and the manifestation of that dream manifests itself in the atom. And that in that respect, we see science saying that the atom in its energy and its forms reflects how a galaxy or a solar system or a universe works. That as the old Hermetic teaching, as above, so below, and the human being in itself, each human being also becomes an atom from the point of view of carrying the seed consciousness, the seed thought, the first elemental kingdom, which will then work into the materia, into the substances that then emerge within the atoms of the Jupiter consciousness. So this is something that is, he was very keen for people to understand, that yes, they are atoms, but these atoms are not just physical protons and neutrons and all the more complex levels of what the atom, as we have come to know it, is, but that it reflects the very dreaming that is the seed form of our evolutionary stage. And that if we are to evolve further, and as we do evolve through consciousness, the human beings will gather together under the leadership of a lodge, the masters of harmony and wisdom, and carry over the seed ideas that are then the atoms of a future cosmos. So the atom is a very important thing to understand in that sense. So there might be something to ponder. How do we, if we live in a world that is only carried by the materialistic philosophy and the dogmas of materialistic science, how do we bring that understanding that yes, matter is a revelation of the dream consciousness of the first elemental kingdom, and as we grow in consciousness, so too does the atomic world grow ever more complex. And here's a thought that I've been pondering. I'm not saying I'm right, but at first there were only a certain number of atoms that were discovered, and as time has gone by, as our consciousness of natural science has become more and more complex and more varied, more and more atoms have been discovered. The question is, were they always there, or have more and more complex atoms appeared as the evolution of consciousness progresses and we then discover them? It's just like at one point we could only see as far as Saturn, and then some outer planets have been discovered, Neptune, Pluto, now Chiron. Were they always there out of sight, or have they also coalesced? And yes, we've created calibrated machines which can help us perceive them, but have they only been there since certain times? For example, it's very interesting to see the correlation between, for example, the discovery of electricity, the discovery of magnetism, the discovery of nuclear energy, and the discovery of these outer planets of Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. A very complex question, a very subtle observation, but possibly matter has not finished revealing itself. And as evolution of consciousness goes on, matter becomes more and more complex and more diverse, and therefore we find ever more and more heavy matter appearing as we evolve. As I said before, there is the possibility of matter disappearing through rarefication of the heat, and then reappearing through the ultraviolet light and through the lightning. So we sort of tend to, in our Western philosophy, I suppose in the world at the moment with our materialistic soul, to feel the foundation of matter as stable and unchanging. But maybe, something to ponder, the atom is an evolving being as well, and it changes and it evolves, and more complex atoms become apparent just as more and more bodies in our solar system appear, so more and more rings, so to say, of the complexity of the atom appear. They are not unrelated to each other. And the consciousness which is carrying that is the human consciousness, the first elemental kingdom of the seed thoughts. And as we gather those seed thoughts together, that is what will carry over at the end of our great Earth evolution into the next form of the sun. So just to recap, there have been 3 suns before our sun. Astronomy is now discovering that in reading the heavy metals in the sun. We are in the 4th sun. This correlates with Steiner's picture of evolution as well. But when we come to the 5th sun, something more will have to emerge, and it is through the wisdom and the mastering of wisdom and harmony in the human soul that will create the seed thought, the dreaming, so to say, of the next emergence of matter in the next great sun. So, again, not something simple, also not something just to laugh at, because it makes us as human beings quite responsible in understanding the spiritual scientific side of matter as well. So I didn't want to replace natural science. He always said, I want to broaden and complement the science that we know. Science is true, but it is limited to only the material, and we need to allow ourselves to grow in our understanding of a spiritual scientific wisdom, and therefore create the seed thoughts for the future. Okay, well, that's were my thoughts for lecture 25. Hope you've had a good weekend, and we're heading towards the end of these lectures. Hope it's been helpful through these times where we've been at home to have something to chew on, something to study. Okay, cheers.